Welcome back to the Welsh History Podcast, episode 64, the Merfynion Battle Royal. During the height of the power of Hywel, a poem was written, possibly around 930. Academics have argued that it may have been positioned later in the decade or even after the death of Hywel. Some have even argued that it may have even been much before that and at the beginning of the 900s. Regardless, it sets out an ideal of a grand anti-English coalition of Irish, Scots, Britons, Welsh, and Vikings. They would finally be rid of the English and create a new harmonious relationship on the island, free from English dominance. It would make sense if it was written after the Battle of Brynthber, as this battle included an alliance of the Scots, Irish, and Vikings against the English, and possibly with the influence of some of the Welsh kingdoms. The English, however, won the day, and of course, it makes a great poem, and it is lauded by the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. The Welsh give it a line in the Annals. The poem is currently a part of the Book of Taliesin. It is called, and again, excuse my Welsh pronunciation, the Armes Prydian. In English, it means the prophecy of Britain. The poem is a prediction that Cadwaladr and Cynan of Brittany, two kings who were at the height of British power a long time previous, would return and conquer. This cycle of callbacks to ancient war leaders is not new, but it will always be fairly strongly intertwined in Welsh medieval writings. We know for a fact that when we look at past mentions of heroes like Aurelius Ambrosius and Arthur in more legendary terms, there has always been an ideal in the Welsh of calling back to great leaders to lead them to victory. And this is no different than that. Some academics claim this poem was written in the face of what was seen as Hywel appeasing the English, since he took neither side in the larger battles. This may have frustrated fellow Welsh who may have wanted him to challenge the English. Some have suggested that this particular poem was written in the south of Wales, which would even make it more of a damnation and a condemnation, because of course that would be his own people that were condemning him for his inaction. Certainly it could easily have been written in the north, where there appears to have been quite a lot of, let's call it, disturbance over the issue of his alignment with the English. His absence on the battlefield could easily be explained by avoiding conflict with the English. He avoided future problems. The security of the Welsh kingdoms had not been strong for most of the last 500 years, and having the biggest bully on the block in your corner may have created the space Hywel felt he needed. His kingdom was not easily protected by would-be allies to the north, so he could likely face the wrath of the English alone. In fact, both Gwynedd and Deuddbarth were victimized by raiding from various Saxon kings over the past 400 years. In those ways, his appeasement worked well for him. He kept the English off his back, and pretty much through his entire reign was seen as a friend of them, which, again, may have worked well with his English overlords, but not so well with his Welsh allies. At the death of Hywel, almost everything changes. First, the sons of Idwal return to Gwynedd and immediately take back their father's kingdom, putting an end to another attempt by the Merfynions to create a pan-Welsh kingdom. The Kingdom of Wales was not to be. Iago, Idwal, and Ewan, Rhodri, and Murig stood against their cousins, Owain, Rhodri, and Edwin, and also, not surprisingly, led this conflict. It is interesting to note that the last born of Hywel is not named Welsh. Edwin, of course, is an old Saxon name. It is not Welsh. So one wonders how this sat with the Welsh nobles, not eager to be a part of English dominance. In 949 or 950, Hywel died. A year later, the sons of Hywel and Idwal fought at Carno. Professor Carrimond speculates that this may have been because the sons of Idwal had already returned to Gwynedd and quickly re-established their links with the local nobility. The fact that it came so quickly after the death of Hywel makes one wonder if they had already been rebuilding support even before that, and whether the North Welsh chafed under the rule of Hywel, who took over Gwynedd only 5 years previous. Effectively, the concern is that the nobility may have looked at his, let's call it, weakness, and had been dubious of his ability to face the English and defeat what they would consider to be their oldest nemesis, and certainly considered the biggest halting point in Welsh dominance. And certainly this may have put an end to the predominant idea that there needed to be a united Welsh kingdom. If, as Professor Charles Edwards postulates, that Idwal ap Arad may have been punished for his involvement in the battles with the English, he being executed after his possible interference in the wars between the English, the Vikings, and the Old North, then it would make sense that the nobles of North Wales may have been less pleased with Hywel's compact with the leader of the English. The idea that he was tacitly agreeing with their aggression and using it to launch his own claim on Gwynedd likely left many quite unhappy. So you can see where that would then allow the sons of Idwal to come forward and trigger into that mentality and use it for their own advantage, which is to take back the kingdom that belonged to their father. And Carno appears to have been a defeat for the sons of Hywel. The sons of Idwal were said in 951 or 952 to have ravaged the south, particularly Dovid. This would have likely have put an end to the ambitions of Hywel, and that would of course show us that there was problems in the north. For them to have amalgamated so quickly into a military force that was able to take on the southern Welsh kings and their military, they must have had support in Gwynedd. And the fact that they were able to push not only into Gwynedd, but actually push all the way into the south and actually cause trouble in Dovid shows that they were definitely a force to be reckoned with. And this would continue to be the case. 2 years later, it was Ceredigion that felt the wrath, as they too were raided. And eventually, by the river of Conwy, once again the sons of Idwal defeated the sons of Hywel. This time they had taken the fight to Iago, as the sons of Hywel had moved north and were actually raiding possibly from Powys into Gwynedd. And at this area around the river Conwy, they clashed, and in this battle, once again, it looks as if the sons of Hywel were defeated, and this time lost one of those sons, as Edwin has apparently died at this point. Problematically, we don't know for sure. It's possible that he died here, but there is confusing mentions of his death in the annals, as they seem to be saying he died in 1 year and then saying he died over a period of a year. There's not really clear-cut definitions of when he died, other than that one mentions he dies in that or shortly after that battle. So thus it would make sense that he may have died of wounds or in some way from fighting in that battle, thus leaving only really one son of Hywel left to defend his father's claims to the thrones of Wales. By 955, it appears that the two sons were now in charge. Owen ap Hywel ruled in Deuddbarth, and Iago ap Idwal ruled in Gwynedd. They both stood as signatories of a grant of land by King Erdred. Now, the reason why we believe that is because they were actually ranked as kings. And in fact, Morgaine in the kingdom of Gwent is actually ranked before both of them. But then it's Owain, and then it is Iago, who are the next two to follow. So that usually shows their importance and possibly their longevity on the throne at that point. So you get that showing there was some consistency, and also, interestingly, showing that there was some form of overlordship by the English crown over Wales even at this point. This changes over the next 20 years, as for about a 20-year period, it appears that the battles between these two cousins continue, and outside forces start to affect them.
Coming up on 5 Minute News. I'm Anthony Davis. You might think it's partisan because maybe it's critical of one side or the other, but it's not. It's just the truth. And I think that's also something that's kind of unusual for Americans listening to the radio or to podcasts, because the news landscape in the States has been so partisan for so many decades. So 5 Minute News is verified, truthful, independent, unbiased, and essential world news daily.
Greetings from Evergreen Podcasts. We're rolling out a listener survey and we want to hear from you. The information in the survey will help us gather statistics and in turn make our shows more appealing to advertisers. I know most people don't like ads, but this is one of the only ways our shows make money and help keep their lights on. We promise it will only take a few minutes, but the impact on our podcasts will be tremendous. As a token of our appreciation, we'll randomly select one lucky participant each month to win an exclusive merchandise package from Evergreen Podcasts. Head to evergreenpodcast.com/listener-survey to help a show and possibly get some free stuff for doing so. We can't thank you enough for the support. Now back to the show.
In ways that are going to change both kingdoms for quite some time. In the meantime, however, the English seem to be having their own sets of problems, which again, dealing with Vikings and others, they weren't really focused on Wales, at least not for a good 10 years at this point. Gwent and Glywysing, in the meantime, had merged into a kingdom that was called Morgannwg. And in that combination, Owain decided to attack. And on 3 separate occasions, he actually attacks the borders of Morgannwg and chips away to their western boundary. In 960, 970, and 977, he, along with his son Einion, continued to force expansion in the south. He may have even ruled Powys at this point, though he may have also lost control of it after the Battle of the River Conwy, which would regardless leave Gwynedd as a strong power to the north. If they controlled Powys, of course, that would make them even larger and a bigger threat to the overall southern kingdom and southern ability of Deuddbarth to expand. However, the sons of Idwal themselves had their own sets of problems. First, in the form of Vikings who attacked in 661 and 662, led by a group called the Sons of Olaf. Now, Professor Charles Edwards, in his writings, has postulated that these Vikings may have come from a couple of different locations, one of which was suggested to be from the Kingdom of Dublin, which was still in Viking hands at this point, and the other being possibly in the Hebrides, this being called also the Island of Foreigners, which meant it was a Viking raiding post, effectively. And either of these could be true. The Olaf that they talk about ruled, in one case, the Kingdom of Dublin at the time. In the other case, there was an Olaf that had ruled at the Hebrides before that, which would make sense if they were the sons of Olaf. There's not a whole clear description. Much like everything else at this time period, names are just bandied about with no concept of who they are, what they're doing, where they're from. You just kind of have to speculate, and a lot of times this leads to an underwhelming amount of information and not terribly historical information to go on. So you're left to guessing at some of this, and that is one of the aspects of this. And so, of course, this problem that they have to deal with causes them to face attacks both in the Llyn Peninsula and on Holyhead. And these were devastating attacks, bad enough that they were mentioned as being savage and that they ravaged the land. And these kind of statements make it think that they probably were fairly devastating to the local population. Interestingly enough, even though they hit the island of Anglesey, there wasn't any loss of kings at this point. There's no mention of any of the kings of Gwynedd dying at this stage. So obviously they were able to fight them off. But nonetheless, these raids from the Vikings were damaging. Certainly they damaged probably the faith of the people with their king, Iago, and also the faith of Iago in his fellow nobles and in his brother. And this will only get worse as time goes on. Elfhira, the elder man of Mercia, marches on Gwynedd in 697. According to the annals, he ravaged the lands of Gwynedd. A year later, he then returns and hits the sons of Idwal again, this time at their capital in Anglesey. These attacks and their aftermath led to a split between the brothers, as Hywel was jailed by Iago in 969. This may have been because Iago was weakened by the losses and possibly feeling threatened. He may have felt that he had no choice but to act against his brother. One can imagine that after this decade of defeats, after so many previous successes the 10 years prior to that, this may have been a bitter pill for these brothers to swallow. It also probably put a lot of mistrust into the minds of his followers and into the minds of his brother and his descendants. Certainly that becomes across as you start to look into history on this, because at this point and shortly thereafter, Iago may have hoped that he was going to heal this split, and he designates his nephew, Hywel, who is the son of Hywel, as his heir. And in fact, there is a document in the English records which shows Hywel anyway, being mentioned ahead of Iago. Now, whether it's this Hywel, we don't know for sure. Academics speculate that it is the case, that he is the person they mean in this situation. If so, that is a hugely important precedent, because it shows that while Iago obviously is still king, he is becoming slowly a subservient king. And instead of being a fellow co-regent with his nephew, he appears to almost be relegated to being a step down from his nephew. Now again, one can see that this may have a relationship to the nobles and what they thought. The one thing that comes across when you look at this period of Welsh history is it appears that the nobility and their support of their kings comes down to the ability of the kings not just to make peace, not just to be able to bring prosperity, but also to be able to fight the wars that they expect them to fight, to be able to take the battle to the enemy and actually win the day. And whenever they can't seem to do that, that seems to be when there is this turn against them. Now, whether it's a full-on revolt or whether it's just a demand and a mutiny against the king, we don't know. There isn't enough information to really inform us on this. We can make some guesses based on other people's problems and how they kind of worked out, and the way things are kind of left unmentioned in the annals leaves one to question some of these things. But we don't know, and we can't really pin down everything that may have happened. Certainly you do question whether or not his brother Hywel was more popular than Iago, and even if Iago was seen as the senior brother, he may have been the older sibling. It calls to question whether or not that he had overstepped his bounds and that he got himself into big trouble by doing what he did. And thus, when he sets Hywel up as his regent and heir, he puts himself into a bad set of circumstances, and ones that he cannot maintain and get out of. And with his death, we see the end of the sons of Idwal in charge of Gwynedd. And we'll see that the sons of Merfynion at this point are starting to die off. By 980, even Owain has died, and all of these sons of Iago and Hywel are gone. And with them, the last link to the stability of the Welsh crown ends, and we get a period of destabilization, which is bad for Wales at this point, because this is creating problems that will go further down the line and certainly create opportunities for some. And we'll see within the next 100 years just how much that opportunity presents itself. And I look forward to talking more about that. I think next time we'll talk a little bit more about millennialism at this point in time, and kind of what the Christian community is thinking as we get close to year 1000 AD. And thank you everyone for listening. Thank you for reaching out, comments on Twitter, I read them. Comments on Facebook, I read them. And emails, I definitely read them. I try and respond when I can. I may not, if I don't respond immediately, or if I didn't respond to you, please don't hesitate to reach out to me again. You can reach me at welshhistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can reach me on Twitter at welshhistorypod. You can also reach me on Facebook at facebook.com/welshhistorypodcast. And thank you very much for listening. Thanks you so much for becoming supporters on Patreon. I've been noticing that more and more people are picking up and considering donating and becoming supporters of our podcast. And thank you very much. I appreciate it. Take care, everyone. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you again. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
Edge of the Abyss Creations is a proud sponsor of the Welsh History Podcast, your one-stop shop for unique jewelry, paintings, and other crafty creations. You can find us at facebook.com/edgeoftheabyss1.
This has been a Distractions Media production. For more info, you can check out everything we do at distractionsmedia.com.
Hi, I'm Nick Eshragani, commentator and host of the India on 99.94 podcast. Several times each week, my co-host Sarah Warris and I will be bringing you the very best in Indian cricket chat, whether we're discussing the legend of Jhulan Goswami, KL Rahul's strike rate, the men's T20 death bowling woes, or the latest controversy involving the BCCI, we've got you covered. You can listen and subscribe via your usual podcast provider. Just search for India on 99.94. You can watch us via YouTube, and you can download the 99.94 app. If you love Indian cricket, then join our conversation.